see. Okay. All right. Mm, Actually, I'm gonna change it really quick how I'm sharing it. There. Now I'll be looking at you the whole time. All right. Well, thank you for those of you who are here today. I'm excited that this worked out and that you're able to be here. I know it's a beautiful sunny day out there, but it is nice to have you in here with me. I'm going to go ahead and mute those who are jumping in. Let me see if I can mute you or if you can mute yourself. There you go. Thank you so much. And I do want to say if at any point you have questions, you're more than welcome to pause me at any point. Just jump in and ask questions. I have no hesitation with that, so don't feel like you have to wait until the end. So I'm Erin Gonzalez, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself here coming up as well. But our objectives here is really focusing on nutrition, menopause, but really the heart of it is focusing on understanding the whys, because so much of when people come in with nutrition, they oftentimes know the nutrition part, but don't necessarily have all the connections to the whys behind it and understanding the difference that those changes make. And not only that, but then how to actually do it. So, just a little bit about me. I'm a registered dietitian. I'm also a certified intuitive eating counselor, and I am also an eating disorder specialist. My full-time job is as a faculty member at Minnesota State University, Mankato, and then I also have a private practice. And I've really dedicated my career to helping individuals break free from the cycle of dieting and to develop a more intuitive, mindful approach to eating. My goal is to empower people to trust their body's signals, to embrace the unique nutritional needs, as well as cultivate a sense of balance and joy in our eating and our meals. And I truly believe that food is not just fuel, but it is also a source of pleasure and it's also a source of connection. And I truly believe that when we learn to become the master of our own bodies again, we no longer need to seek someone else to be the expert of it. So that's a lot of the focus and my nutrition philosophy and approach that I take is really individualizing every person's care so that we're understanding kind of the language of each person's unique bodies so that we can understand, what is that person's body telling us and how is that informing us so that we can make nutrition decisions that are aligned with the body's specific needs. All right. Um, so I want to start with just a little bit of conversation around, when you're coming in today and you're thinking about being here, what were you most concerned about or what are you most concerned about when you think about menopause? So if you can just take a moment and, jump in your chat box for me and just type in there what comes up for you. There we go. So I'll give people just a moment to, I gave some examples there of what might be options. Perfect. Got some confusing nutrition advice. That is a for sure. Okay, weight gain. Yeah, we're definitely going to be talking about that. All right. Great. So those are definitely the most common ones. And when we think about confusing nutrition advice, there was a research study that was done that reviewed nutrition information online for accuracy. And they found that 90% of the nutrition posts that are made online are inaccurate. So it's really hard because we have this, plethora of nutrition information at our fingertips, but unfortunately, so much of it is actually inaccurate, poor advice by people who don't have the training and the degrees to support the information that providing. So we have to be careful with that. All right, so now next, what topic are you most interested in? So, are you hopeful to kind of learn about foods to best support your body, how to support better sleep, protein needs during menopause, or bone supportive nutrition? Or again, if the topic is on there that, that you're thinking about, it's not on there, feel free to type that one in there too. All right, great. So one and three kind of go along with each other too. So we'll be jumping in on all four of these today. All right, so just a little background with regards to the menopause transition. So we have perimenopause, and that lasts an average of 4 years for females. However, it can last up to 10 years. So just really depending upon that transitional period, genetics plays a role with this. There's just a lot of variables that kind of come into it, but on average, it's about 4 years. And then menopause, which clinically is defined as 12 consecutive months without a menstrual period. And then postmenopause is going to be all the time after menopause. And statistics show that females can live 30% to 40% of their lives in a postmenopausal state. So, knowing how do we manage, how do we take care of our bodies during that time is pretty important because that's a pretty significant amount of time that we are spending in this postmenopausal and menopausal state of our life. So it's going to have an impact on us. And unfortunately, I would say up to this point, there hasn't been a lot of conversation. There hasn't been a lot of, preventative talks with regards to how do you navigate this. And so oftentimes women are having to advocate for themselves. And I think we're seeing a shift in that. There's certifications now out there that providers can get. And there's actually a website called menopause.org that you can go and you can actually find providers who have obtained certifications, so doctors who've obtained certifications in menopause in your zip code. So definitely more resources now more than ever in the past. So what's happening? I'm not going to go deep into this, but we're going to give just kind of the surface level stuff here. But obviously, a lot of hormonal changes that are occurring during this time in our life. Menopause, again, is a time when the menstrual cycle ceases, and it is caused by a reduced secretion of ovarian hormones, specifically estrogen and progesterone. And as a result of that, we end up with decreased production of those hormones that leads to an increase in visceral fat. So the fat that most often is going to be in that stomach area and is associated with increased chronic disease risks. So when we have more fat in that stomach area, we are at an increased risk of diabetes, heart disease, stroke, cancers, etc. So we'll talk more about that too. We also see a decrease in lean muscle mass, and this is a really big one with regards to also correlating back to that weight gain as well as our metabolism. We also see a decrease in bone density, which certainly increases the risk of osteoporosis and osteoarthritis. We also see an increase in LDL, which is that bad cholesterol, and a decrease in HDL, which is our good cholesterol. And unfortunately, as a result of that, it increases our cardiovascular risk. And then we see a resting metabolic rate. So our metabolism often will decrease because of these hormonal changes, but not only because of the hormonal changes, but also because of this loss of fat-free mass, which is that loss of muscle mass. So as we lose muscle mass, our metabolism will also shift down with it. And when our metabolism shifts down, we need less calories in order to maintain that same weight. So we'll talk about that as well as we get into that conversation around weight. So let's pause here for a moment and explore what are some of these big barriers and gaps with regards to this information. So some of the things that you already pointed out is conflicting nutrition advice. One person says this, another person says this. How do we really know? Outdated messaging, eat less calories, intermittent fasting, some of this information that's out there and is available. People have been dieting for years, and as a result of that, their metabolism has shifted as a result of just the dieting and the weight shifting back and forth, which unfortunately negative impacts metabolism. And so we continue to have that messaging kind of carry through. And then certainly an emotional relationship with food that has maybe carried on from, a lot of periods of our life from um, different seasons of our lives, different influencers as well. And that plays a role with things. And then, as we've already been talking about, this lack of menopause specific guidance. We're not having these conversations necessarily being asked of us when we go into the doctor's office. And so, this is something that, again, I think we are seeing some change with, which I think is really, really powerful and really important. And we also have this mismatch between old habits and this new physiology. So if we think about old habits, women are very good at dieting, and the joke is until about 4:30 p.m., right? But the problem with that is when we are not eating consistently throughout the day, our natural body's hunger hormones are going to become ravenous by that time at the end of the day. And we end up, you cannot outsmart biology. So we just get hungrier and hungrier and hungrier to the point that we set ourselves up for physiological overeating or binge eating. So, for something that we've tried so hard to do in the past, which is dieting and fad diets, and we've been even told to do that by maybe some unintended, healthcare providers. Unfortunately, that is not going to support what we need for good nutrition and to support metabolism for optimal health and for optimal reduction of symptoms during menopause. And we have this new physiology from all the shifting hormones, and this oftentimes is a major reason for frustration as well as feelings of defeat. So, this period of life, it often also comes with balancing career demands, aging parents, teenagers, college age kids, less time for movement, less time for exercise, maybe divorces. Like there's just so many things oftentimes that are going on in our lives that are also complicating it and sometimes making that self-care maybe more challenging, especially if we haven't been devoting time to self-care prior as well. So let's start out with the big one. So, is weight gain inevitable through the menopause transition? So, I want to really bring this in because it's important that we talk about weight gain because that is one of the biggest questions and biggest concerns that come up as we're talking about menopause. So, weight gain is absolutely common in aging females, particularly through perimenopause. So, on average, females gain about 1.5 pounds per year in their 40s and their 50s. And research shows that this is independent of their initial body size or race and ethnicity. So, it happens kind of across the board for every female. And there's, as I previously mentioned, this greater tendency for central fat compared with kind of age and BMI match premenopausal counterparts, where maybe their weight is going to be more in their hips, alternatively. And as I mentioned, that central fat is more associated with increased risks for diabetes and heart disease and cancers. Also, during menopausal transition, visceral adipose tissue increases from 5 to 8% of total body fat to 15 to 20%. So, menopause transition is also associated with a decrease in lean muscle mass. So, we have this also co-occurring with each other, that we have this loss of lean muscle mass that naturally occurs after about age 30. And we know that people are not getting enough exercise. And exercise is really, and we'll talk about this as we move forward in other slides, but it's really non-negotiable if you are wanting to preserve your body, preserve your metabolism, and to reduce the likeliness of excess weight gain. The best way that we can work alongside of that is strength training. That is a non-negotiable, and most people and most women are not doing it. Now, bottom line, bodies absolutely change with age. And so it's something that we want to be talking more about. We compare this kind of menopausal transitional stage similar to puberty that we have for females, right? So when we think about females in puberty, they are gaining weight prior to having those first menstrual cycles. And similarly, that's not talked about often enough. And if we talked about it more, it very well could help many females, many women feel better about their bodies. If they knew that they were going to gain weight in their stomach, and then as they developed, that would, even itself out as long as we are focusing on positive health behaviors. And so similar concept here in menopause, we know that weight is going to change. Bodies are going to change. So is it inevitable? It is inevitable that we are going to experience weight gain during this transition, but how much is the piece that we can be a bit more in kind of charge of and be able to implement some strategies that can help to reduce how much and then the impact that it has on our overall health outcomes. So let's explore some of these common symptoms. So we already talked about weight changes briefly there. So this is experienced by 60 to 70% of women, and it is really related to those hormonal changes that ultimately decrease that basal metabolic rate. So how many calories your body is burning at rest. So this is why a lot of people will say, well, I haven't changed anything, but I'm gaining weight. So when that's happening, we are seeing that metabolism shift down. This happens for a lot of people who are losing weight actively. And after their body recognizes that it's losing too much weight, it will slow metabolism down so that it can conserve energy. So the same here is true, but it's actually occurring because of the hormonal changes as well as the loss of that lean muscle mass, so occurring for different kind of reasons. And then that lower estrogen levels are going to shift the fat storage, and it shifts that fat storage towards our stomach area. So protein and resistance training, so we'll circle back around to more information on that, but those are really key foundational pieces for how do we work to decrease how much weight we gain during these things. We need to be focusing on adequate and consistent protein intake, as well as a minimum of 2 days a week of resistance training. Up to 3 is also ideal, but at least a minimum of 2 days per week of strength training. That preserves the muscle mass. And when we preserve the muscle mass, we are increasing our metabolism as a result of that because it's an active tissue. So it's actively burning calories just sitting there when we have more. Now, there's many other really great reasons for doing resistance training just outside of that. It also helps you with more having better mobility, having better flexibility. It also reduces the likeliness of falls as we age because you are stronger and you have better balance. So there's a lot of really good benefits to that resistance training outside of just, this idea of body composition. Also, fiber-rich carbohydrates. So we'll talk more about that. That's really important. It helps with satiety, right? It helps us feel fuller longer. It also is really beneficial for our gut microbiome to have lots and lots of fiber-rich foods. The more diverse our diet is, the more diverse our gut microbiome is, and that we are finding for research is incredibly important for weight as well as for chronic diseases and inflammation too. And then energy balance, but without dieting. You're going to keep hearing me say that today, that dieting is not the way through. We need to focus on good nutrition. We need to focus on adding foods in, not taking away. So we're really working to finding a way of eating that feels good to us and that is satisfying and enjoyable at the same time. And both can coexist. It doesn't have to be one or the other. We can find these overlaps and figure out, well, how much and how often, right? So I always like to say a choice is just a choice. unless it's a behavior. So if it's something we're doing on a consistent basis, that's a behavior and that's going to have an impact on our health, either positively or negatively. Whereas if it's only something we're doing on occasion, not much is going to come of that and we don't have to, worry about it as much. So this is not a you can't have, right? We want to think about how does it feel when I consume it, and how is that aligning with the goals that I have and the values that I have? All right, so the next big common symptom, of course, are hot flashes. Now, not everyone experiences them, as much as the next person. And so some people, have very mild hot flashes, and some people have much more severe. Common triggers are things like alcohol, caffeine, and spicy foods. And also, large blood sugar swings can also worsen hot flash intensity. So, maintaining stable blood sugars by really focusing on consistent eating windows. So, we usually say that's about 3 meals a day and 1 to 2 snacks a day. So, eating about every 3 to 5 hours. If we're going more than 5 hours without eating, then we are oftentimes not very connected to our internal hunger and fullness cues. So the sweet spot is generally somewhere between 2 to 4 hours. And that then will help to maintain those steady blood sugars as long as we're eating at that consistent pattern and then balancing the food that we have on that plate. So, really focusing on lean proteins, fiber rich carbohydrates, color, fruits, veggies, right, and healthy fats as well. Now, research is showing that soy, I know there's been soy has kind of had its moment back and forth, similar to eggs, but the research around soy is that it can be helpful for hot flashes. And you can experiment it with it, see how it feels for your body. But the research is about 2 servings per day of soy can help for some people to reduce hot flashes. Some people are worried because the past research has been around soy and cancer, in particular breast cancer. But the research has really debunked that. And in fact, a lot of research is showing that consumption of soy actually helps to reduce, not only reducing cancer, breast cancer, but also reducing reoccurrence. So important information there to make sure we're debunking. So what does, 2 servings of soy look like? Some of my favorite ways to incorporate soy. I love edamame. That's a great one. I like to throw it in my stir fries. Some people like to just toss it with a little bit of, olive oil, maybe a little bit of salt, and eat it steamed that way. There are some companies out there now that make edamame snacks that are kind of dried. Those are fabulous. I've picked those up at Costco and they're really good. Other ways, a glass of soy milk, soy creamer, those are great options. Tofu, of course, is another option there for soy too. So different ways that we can incorporate that on a more regular basis. And then something that I also wanted to share that the research shows is that for females who do have hot flashes, especially frequent episodes, and kind of long, like occurring, like they continue to happen, that is showing that it might indicate a female specific cardiovascular disease risk factor. So, research is showing that females who experience hot flashes are at a 50 to upwards of 75% increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So, something just to be aware of with that information, that if you are someone who experiences hot flashes during that time, to be even more intentional about making sure we're checking in on those labs, the lipid panels, as well as making sure we're focusing on heart healthy nutrition and exercise in order to reduce some of those risk factors that we have. So again, just a reminder, if at any point anyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself, interrupt me. I'm super happy to pause at any time for any questions. You don't have to hold them till the end. All right, so next, sleep disturbances. This is another common complaint. Again, this is often happening as a result of those shifting hormones that are occurring. So some things that we can do, avoiding heavy meals as well as alcohol before bed. Magnesium, also a supplement that's having its moment right now too. And research does show that many people are deficient in magnesium. And so that can be a beneficial supplement to take. But we do always focus on a food first approach. So we want to get our nutrition through food as much as possible because what you don't get in a supplement is you don't get the antioxidants, you don't get the fiber, you don't get the vitamins and the minerals. You don't get all of the goodness that you get in the whole food itself. So magnesium rich foods are going to be things nuts and seeds and chocolate, especially dark chocolate. That's going to be a really good one for magnesium. So finding ways to increase that naturally in the diet can be really helpful. Otherwise, a dietary supplement is certainly something you can consider. Magnesium can also be helpful for constipation. So I just want to mention that really quick right now, too. Specifically, the magnesium citrate one, that one's a bit more for that, whereas magnesium glycinate, threonate, those ones are a bit more for the stress and anxiety. So the form of magnesium does matter. So just something to be aware of there. And you do want to take it at night. Also, we can wake between that 2 to 3 a.m. because of cortisol spikes as well as blood sugar dips. So for some, it can be helpful to experiment with just a small balanced snack before bed. So something that would have those higher fiber carbohydrates as well as maybe some protein in there too. So that's could be something like maybe some hummus and some veggies. That could be maybe if you like popcorn, popcorn is actually not a bad snack. It is a high fiber snack, so that can be a nice one too. That is a slow carbohydrate. We would consider that. And you could maybe have that with maybe a small handful of cheese or something. So just ways you can think about balancing that carb and protein at that time, but not a large snack, just a small one. And then the other thing for sleep disturbances that I can't not talk about when we talk sleep is the importance of sleep hygiene and sleep routine, turning our screens off an hour before sleep, maybe doing meditation before sleep, turning the lights down low, reading a book, journaling, doing some form of self-care during that time frame. And if we are having these moments of wakefulness during night, is what can we do in that moment to try to get back to sleep, right? Maybe it is just having some water by our bedside, just doing that, putting sleep music on, just trying to figure out what's another routine if that happens that can also help us get back into sleep. Mood and energy. So this is again one of those moments where hormones are just kind of everywhere during this time frame, and that can impact that mood as well as our energy. But the things that we can control, we can work to manage our blood sugars, and we do that by eating, as I previously mentioned, kind of that within that 3 to 5 hours. Again, not going beyond those 5 hours once we're awake. Ideally, we are prioritizing breakfast. We do not want to be doing that intermittent fasting, and I'll talk more about that, but we really don't encourage that fasting window more than just the normal 12-hour fast at night from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. That's a very normal fasting window, but a 16-hour fast has not been shown to be helpful, especially when we're talking about menopause and especially when we're talking about muscle preservation. Coffee only mornings, this is something else. It doesn't mean you can't have coffee. Again, we just want you to have it with your meal, with your food, and that can also help. And then making sure we're getting in that consistent, balanced nutrition again, lean protein, fiber rich foods, fruits and veggies that bring in that color and fiber, and some healthy fat will also help to stabilize those blood sugars. So a good rule of thumb is never just a carb. So if you're going to have something like a piece of fruit, for example, that's going to spike your blood sugars, and then you're going to be hungry pretty quickly afterwards. Maybe a half an hour to an hour is about the length of time it's meant to keep you full for. So if you were to have an apple and you pair it with maybe some nut butter, now it's going to keep us feeling satisfied for longer. So some common misconceptions, I've already hinted at this one, that intermittent fasting is the key to symptom relief. It's been popularized, in a sense that it's going to fix all these different things. But for many people, intermittent fasting can worsen brain fog, it can worsen fatigue, it can worsen food cravings. And for many, it ends up influencing overeating and influencing binge eating episodes to occur. And it goes against kind of this natural circadian rhythm as well. So research is stronger that when people especially eat their larger meal at breakfast and then kind of same concept at lunch, and then actually that supper time is a little bit lighter, so a bit more protein and veggies, fiber there. Maybe we do a whole grain, but not as much carbohydrate rich as our other meals, that blood sugars are actually better that way. So we really want to flip kind of what most people are doing. Weight gain is inevitable. We've kind of talked about this a little bit that yes, our bodies are going to change, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We can still improve health independent of weight. And that's a message that is so powerful and so important for people to hear. Because if we only hear you need to lose weight, you need to lose weight, then if we start making these positive behavior changes, but we don't see the scale change, we just stop doing it because we feel like it's not working. When in reality, we know for a fact that if we hang in there and we keep improving these behaviors independent of weight loss, we are still going to improve health. If you are engaging in positive nutrition behaviors, engaging in good sleep, managing stress, moving your body, especially bringing in strength training like we've been talking about, that is going to decrease cardiovascular disease. It's going to decrease the risk of cancer. It's going to decrease diabetes and blood sugar levels. We know those things are true independent of changing weight. So it is important to just come into that space. That doesn't mean someone doesn't want to lose weight or it couldn't be a potential outcome. It just means that if that's all we're focusing on, we're more likely to set ourselves up for not actually continuing to change those behaviors if we don't end up losing weight. Another one is feeling like eating less is the answer to the problem because that's what we've been told for our whole life, right? As women, as females, we've been told to skip breakfast, cut portions, fasting, avoiding carbohydrates. Many, especially if we're hitting menopause right now, it's been no fat. We've lived through all of these things, right? But in reality, under eating can worsen cravings. It worsens muscle loss. It worsens sleep as well as cortisol regulation. And low calorie diets lead to nutrient deficiencies. And I always like to say a malnourished person, like a smaller person, but a malnourished person is an unhealthy person. So we really have to focus on nutrition in order to support optimal health independent of body size. We definitely live in a society right now where carbohydrates are still kind of being really heavily criticized, but in reality, carbohydrates are not the problem. And in fact, they are the body's primary source of fuel. But we do want to focus on carbohydrate sources that are going to be more effective. So notice my language here. I'm not saying better. I'm not saying these ones are good and these ones are bad. I'm saying we want to focus on carbohydrates that are more effective for managing blood sugars, for reducing cardiovascular disease, for keeping you feeling fuller longer. And these are going to be those carbohydrates that are rich in fiber. So this is going to be our quinoa, our farro. This is chickpea pastas and those types of pastas that have the carbohydrate and the protein or the fiber and the protein in there because it's going to keep blood sugars lower. Beans, sweet potatoes, regular potatoes, all of these foods are going to provide the body with more fiber and it helps with that satiety. So we do not need to eliminate carbohydrates. They are an important part of it. We just need to eat it in a way that's going to be effective for managing the blood sugar, for managing those pieces with it. We've already talked about the soy, so I won't go more into that. I've already briefly touched on the fact that cardio is not enough. Cardio is good. Cardio is absolutely important. However, it's not enough. And as I previously mentioned, strength training is non-negotiable. If you are wanting to get through menopause with the least amount of weight gain, you have to be engaging in strength training and resistance at least twice a week. And then we also need to add protein. So I'll talk about that. I wanted to briefly mention that in perimenopause, there is an increased risk for eating disorders. And this is, multifactorial, right? At this point, it presents challenges of how a person feels about their body. It especially can also bring up history for those who've struggled with disordered eating or struggled with an eating disorder in their adolescence or in their college years, whenever it might be. And the majority of females with midlife eating disorders are not in treatment, don't seek treatment, and oftentimes are afraid or embarrassed to talk to someone about it. And so as a result of it, it goes unnoticed. And struggling with that is only going to worsen our stress. It's going to worsen all of the cortisol levels, and it most likely is also going to obviously worsen our eating patterns, which then is going to lead to potentially restrict binge cycles, and it's going to worsen likely that weight gain as well. So we want to make sure that if we are struggling with disordered eating disorders, that we are seeking help because help is there, and there are more resources now than ever to support people through this. So I did want to give you just some general information here too with regards to nutrition needs. So we've been talking about protein and the importance of protein. We absolutely need protein in order to support the maintenance of our muscles. So the general recommendation is that we are aiming for about 20 to 25 grams of protein at each of those eating windows. So meals, snacks, we're aiming for about 20 to 25 grams of protein. So what does that look like? If you're thinking about eggs, one egg is about 7 grams of protein. Okay, a glass of milk is roughly about, well, it depends on which brand you do, but it could be, 7, could be 12 grams. If you're using something like Fairlife milk, that's going to be closer to like 14. So it just depends on what you do. Yogurt is also a really great source of protein if it's a Greek protein. If you're thinking about, meat, the size of the palm of our hand or a deck of cards is going to be about 21 grams of protein. So aiming for that 2025 is really, really the goal. Calcium is incredibly important because of the shift with that estrogen. The body is shifting how it's making our bones as well. So it is important because we have an increased risk of bone loss, which then leads to that higher osteoporosis risk. Bonus, resistance training decreases that as well because when we are putting pressure on our bones, it actually tells your bones to build more bone. So that's another reason to engage in that resistance training. The goal is about 1,200 milligrams per day of calcium. So what does that look like if you think about a glass of milk? That's roughly somewhere around 250, maybe 300 milligrams of calcium in that one. And kind of similar with your yogurt. So typically we're saying at least 3 dairy sources a day, stick of string cheese, glass of milk, cup of yogurt, cottage cheese, all of those are great sources. Also, dark green leafy vegetables, nuts and seeds, fortified foods can also be in there. The one thing to know with regards to calcium and kind of like our dark green leafy vegetables and nuts and seeds is that they're not as absorbable. So just something to be aware of. Now, if you are someone who is dairy free or struggles with getting in adequate calcium, then certainly taking a calcium supplement can be helpful. We like people to aim for at least half of their calcium to be through food and then the other half to be through supplements, just because of absorbability. But that is what you are aiming for. And then if you are taking a calcium supplement, it's also beneficial to know that your body can only absorb about 500 to 600 milligrams of that at a time. So you do need, if you are going to take all of it in supplement form, you do need to separate it out. Oh, forgot vitamin D, which is wonderful because we're finally getting it on a consistent basis. So the ideal, if you're taking it in a supplement form, which if you live in a northern state, as you do, especially in the wintertime, it is incredibly important to be taking a vitamin D supplement. It is pretty much impossible for the average northern hemisphere person to get adequate vitamin D. And vitamin D, research is showing continually, is a precursor for a lot of disease states. So a deficiency in it can be the difference between getting a disease condition and not getting a disease condition. So I can't overemphasize the importance of adequate vitamin D. Bone loss will accelerate in menopause if we do not have adequate vitamin D in order to absorb calcium into our bones. So the best source of vitamin D is the sun when it is out and available, but even in the wintertime, it is too far away. But during the summertime, when it is here, 10 minutes is really all we need of sun exposure in order to get adequate vitamin D. But then after that, of course, put on the sunscreen, right? Put on the layers in order to protect your skin after that. But do know if you're putting on sunscreen, obviously that's going to impact your absorption. If you're wearing clothes, that's going to impact absorption. Also, if you are someone who has darker skin color, that actually also is going to impact those as well. Tiffany, do you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
So when you said, I gotta go back to the protein section.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Okay, let me go back. 20 to 25 grams per meal or per day?
Per meal.
Okay,
Yep. So the ideal is that every time you're eating, so a meal or a snack, we're aiming for about 20 grams.
okay.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Okay, so egg yolks are actually a great source of vitamin D, and fatty fish is also a really good source of vitamin D. So canned salmon, believe it or not, super high in vitamin D. Fiber, I cannot overemphasize the importance of fiber. I know we talk a lot about protein and increasing protein, but to me, fiber and protein are without question at the absolute same level. We need fiber in order to improve gut health, in order to improve cholesterol levels, in order to improve satiety, which then really helps with the calorie piece of it for when that metabolism shifts downward. Really great sources. I love adding chia seeds to my oatmeal. I add chia seeds to my yogurt. I'll put it in cottage cheese sometimes. I find all the ways that I can add chia seeds. It's high in fiber, it's got protein, it's got healthy fat. So it's a great thing to add into it. It's also really shelf stable. Oats, nuts, and seeds are great to incorporate in on a regular basis. Beans and lentils are excellent. As I mentioned previously, pastas. Chickpea pastas are really great. You know, any of those pastas that are out there that have that fiber and that protein are really going to be more effective for you. Now, this doesn't mean that you can never or you shouldn't ever have, white rice. I think about my family just started really enjoying this curry, and I think about having that curry with, let's say like quinoa, and it just would not hit the same spot as it does with having it with like some cilantro lime white rice. Like it just wouldn't, right? And so as long as I'm aware of that and then I'm balancing it with other fiber and other nutrients, I'm not worried about incorporating that white jasmine or basmati rice. That is much more, culturally imperative for me, right? But if I can, and if it still allows me to have the same enjoyment, I'm going to swap it out for something that's going to provide my body with more of that nutritional benefit and longevity piece of it. And so, of course, fruits and veggies loaded in fiber. And our goal is to get 40 plants throughout the week. Okay, so 40 plants throughout the week. So before you freak out and you're like, Erin, there's no way. Like, how would we do it? Okay, chia seeds are a plant, oats are a plant, nuts and seeds are a plant, beans are a plant, whole wheat, breads, pastas, those are all plants, fruits and vegetables, those are all plants. Tea is plant, coffee is plant, chocolate is plant. All of those things are plants. All right, so I feel like I already just named 20 of them, right? So the goal is more variety, more diversity of plants. So, yes, we talk about protein and the importance of protein, but really what we need is a plant forward diet, not a vegetarian diet. Now, vegetarianism is perfectly fine and people can absolutely meet adequate nutrition that way. But we need a plant forward diet. We need more plants in our consumption, right? In our meal planning. And we also need to balance that then with the protein. The other thing I wanted to mention with the breads as well is that a really good option for bread is also the sprouted bread. So, sprouted bread, because of the fermentation process that it goes through, is really good for digestion. And research has shows that it keeps blood sugars lower because it requires less insulin. And that's really important because that's another area that we know with regards to menopause is that we are at a higher risk for insulin resistance. And so that is really important in order to help keep those blood sugars more stable. Now, omega 3s, incredibly important for an anti-inflammatory, which is very helpful for supporting mood as well as heart health. So here we're aiming for salmon, sardines, herring, anchovies, and tuna also fits in here too, like white tuna. And the goal is having about like 2 servings of fish a week is really the goal. Flax and chia seeds are high in omega-3, walnuts, extra virgin olive oil is really the best one out there with regards to that omega-3 content. And then phytoestrogen. So again, here's my plant forward space. These are plant-derived compounds that mimic weak estrogen in the body. So we actually want to increase these. So that's that soy food, chickpeas. They're one of my favorite go-tos for quick, easy lunches. I love chickpeas, beans, flax seeds. Those are all great ways to add in those phytoestrogens. Fluid. We cannot talk nutrition without also talking fluid. It's extremely important for heat balance. So, especially when we're thinking about those hot flashes, optimal GI tract functioning, overall proper functioning of the body as well. And our hormonal changes also affect thirst signals. So, you don't want to wait to feel thirsty before you drink. You want to just be focusing on consistent drinking throughout the day. And an appropriate intake of fluid is about 33 milliliters per kilogram of body weight. And something that I just thought about that I forgot to mention with regards to the hot flashes is that there was some research around people who exercise and the fact that the body, because of exercise, especially if you exercise to a point where you're sweating, your body has learned how to kind of adapt to that shifting in temperature. And they believe that women who exercise are less likely to have the higher amount of hot flashes because the body has figured out how to adapt to that. So, interesting information out there. All right, so where does generic advice fall short? It often falls short because it just gives you this very simple eat healthy, reduce calories, move more, sleep better, right? But it doesn't account for personalization that's related to the hormonal changes, the muscle loss, the increased protein needs, the actual specifics, right? So knowing what to do is really not the same as being able to do it consistently. And to be able to do it consistently, we really need more support, right? And so that is something that Ashley and I are really wanting to offer to you all if that is something that, you're seeking and you're interested in, is really focusing on that guidance that tells you how to do it, but yet doing it within a space where you feel supported, right? Doing it within a space where there are others who are going through this just like you, that you can talk through it, you can feel, validated, you can feel like you are not alone in this space and in this process. So I have a QR code on here that you can scan, and it takes you to a survey where I'm just trying to collect some general information with regards to what would be your interest in a potential group program. What would that ideal length look like? What would be the ideal timeframes, et cetera. So there is the potential that it could be covered by insurance. So that's something that we can also look into for people. Otherwise, self-pay would certainly be an option too. If that QR code doesn't work for you, let me know. But otherwise, either way, I will send out the recording to this link. I will give it to Ashley, and I can also give that link to directly to that survey too for anyone who might be interested in completing it. All right. Any questions that I can answer that I haven't already? Oh, good. Thanks, Ashley, for letting me know that the QR code worked. Okay. All right. right. Well, if you don't have any questions, please know I'm always super happy to answer questions, and I will share that email address too with Ashley. She has it. So certainly, if you have a few, simple questions, I'm always happy to answer those for you too. And then we'll send out those links as well. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight, and I hope you get to enjoy the beautiful weather outside.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.